Welcome to Module ACC WR 2.2, titled Introductions, Conclusions, and Transitions. In our previous module, we discussed the internal architecture of a paragraph. Now, we are zooming out to look at the connective tissue of the entire essay. This module is about how a writer manages the on-ramp, the off-ramp, and the logical bridges of a passage. On the accuplacer, you are being tested on your ability to ensure the reader is never lost, never surprised by a sudden shift, and never left wondering why the essay has ended. To secure a top-tier score, you must understand the specific rhetorical functions of these three elements. Let us begin with transitions, as they are the most frequently tested element in the writing section. A transition is not just a filler word. It is a logical signpost that tells the reader's brain how to process the next piece of information. The test makers will often ask you to choose the transition that best reflects the relationship between the sentences. To answer this correctly, you must categorize every transition into one of four logical families. The first family is the contrast family. This includes words like however, nevertheless, on the other hand, conversely, and despite this. Use these when the second sentence is going in a different direction than the first. However, there is a nuance here that the accuplacer uses to trick high-level students. There is a difference between simple contrast and concession. However is for a simple turn. Nevertheless is for a concession. It means, in spite of what I just said, this other thing is still true. If an author says, the hike was dangerous, nevertheless we reached the summit, they are showing that the danger did not stop the action. Choosing the wrong flavor of contrast can cost you a point. The second family is the addition and similarity family. This includes furthermore, moreover, in addition, likewise, and similarly. These signposts tell the reader that the next sentence is more of the same. If you use furthermore when you should have used however, you have created a logical collision. A top-tier editor always reads the sentence before the transition and the sentence after the transition to see if the vibe is the same or different. If sentence A is a plus and sentence B is a plus, use an addition word. If sentence A is a plus and sentence B is a minus, use a contrast word. The third family is the causation family. This includes consequently, therefore, accordingly, as a result, and hence. These indicate a because-so relationship. If sentence B is a direct result of sentence A, you must use a causation word. The trap here is the sequential distractor. The test makers will give you the word subsequently, which means then or later, and they will put it in an answer choice alongside consequently, which means because of that. Just because something happened after an event doesn't mean it happened because of the event. You must ensure the logic is truly causal before picking consequently. The fourth family is the illustration and emphasis family. This includes, for instance, specifically, notably, and in fact. These signal that the author is moving from a general claim to a specific high-definition example. If sentence A says, the city has many beautiful parks, and sentence B discusses Central Park, the correct signpost is specifically or for instance. Now let us shift our focus to the on-ramp of the essay, the introduction. In the writing section, you are often asked to choose a sentence that best introduces the passage. A top-tier introduction must do two things simultaneously. It must provide the context, and it must establish the thesis. The context is the background information the reader needs to understand the topic. The thesis is the specific argument the author is going to make. The most common error in introductions is the scope error. The test makers will give you an answer choice that is too broad. For example, if the essay is about the benefits of school uniforms in high schools, a trap introduction would say, education has been a part of human society since the beginning of time. This is what we call a universal generalization. It is fluff. It is too far away from the actual topic. The correct introduction should be targeted. It should mention modern education, school policy, or student behavior within the first sentence. Another sophisticated skill is the thesis placement. In almost all a couplacer passages, the thesis statement is the final sentence of the introduction paragraph. It acts as the contract for the rest of the essay. If the test asks you to add a sentence to clearly state the author's main claim, look for the spot at the very end of the first paragraph. The thesis should be a roadmap that previews the main points of the upcoming body paragraphs. If the essay is going to discuss cost, safety, and efficiency, a top-tier thesis will mention all three of those categories. Now let us discuss the connective tissue between paragraphs, which I call the look-back, look-forward technique. This is how you handle transitions between entire sections of an essay. A common question will ask, which choice provides the best transition from the previous paragraph? The correct answer will always have two parts. Part 1 looks back by briefly mentioning the topic of the paragraph you just finished. Part 2 looks forward by introducing the topic of the new paragraph. Listen to this example for your audio training. If paragraph 1 was about the environmental benefits of solar power, and paragraph 2 is about the financial costs of installation, a weak transition would be, now let us talk about money. That is too abrupt. A top-tier, a couplacer-style transition would be, while the environmental advantages of solar energy are clear, the significant upfront cost of installation remains a primary barrier for many homeowners. Notice how environmental advantages looks back to paragraph 1 and upfront cost looks forward to paragraph 2. This bridge creates a seamless flow that earns you the highest score. The off-ramp of the essay is the conclusion. On the couplacer, a conclusion has one primary job: to synthesize, not just summarize. A summary just repeats the main points like a robot. A synthesis explains the so what factor. It tells the reader why the information they just read actually matters in the real world. The number one trap in conclusion questions is the new information trap. The test makers will give you an answer choice that is a very exciting, interesting, or controversial new fact. For example, in an essay about the history of the library, the trap conclusion might say, in the future, libraries may be replaced by holographic AI assistants. While that is a fascinating thought, it is a new idea. A conclusion must never introduce a new topic that wasn't discussed in the body of the essay. If you see an answer choice that brings up a new category of information, delete it from your mind. It is a focus breaker. The correct concluding sentence should circle back to the introduction. If the introduction started with a question or a specific image, the conclusion should answer that question or revisit that image. This provides rhetorical closure. You might see a question like, which of the following provides the best concluding statement for the passage? Look for the choice that uses restated academic terms from the thesis. If the thesis used the word essential, the conclusion might use the word indispensable. They are synonyms that reinforce the central focus of the essay without being redundant. Let us dive deeper into the abrupt shift error. This occurs when an author jumps from one idea to another without any transitional word or phrase. On the couplacer, you will see a question that asks, which of the following would best improve the flow between sentence 4 and sentence 5? If you read the two sentences and feel a logical jolt, like a car hitting a pothole, you need a transition. For example, sentence 4, the City Council voted to increase the budget for public parks. Sentence 5, the local library system is still facing significant funding cuts. These two sentences are related to city funding, but they are opposing facts. If you just put them side by side, it's a jolt. The correct answer would add a transition like in contrast or meanwhile to sentence 5. Meanwhile, the local library system is still facing significant funding cuts. The word meanwhile acts as the shock absorber that smooths out the logical jolt. Another high-level strategy involves internal transitions within a list. If an author is listing 3 reasons why a law failed, they should use ordinal transitions, words like first, second, and third. However, the couplacer loves to use sophisticated ordinals. Instead of first, they might use initially. Instead of second, they might use furthermore. Instead of third, they might use finally or most significantly. You must ensure that the transition reflects the weight of the idea. If the third reason is the most important one, the best transition is most importantly or crucially, rather than just also. Transitions also manage time and space. In a narrative or historical passage, you need transitions that show the temporal relationship. If an author is describing a chemical reaction, they might use subsequently or simultaneously. If they are describing a landscape, they might use beyond the horizon or adjacent to the river. If you are asked to improve the clarity of a description, look for the choice that provides a spatial anchor. Without these anchors, the reader cannot visualize the scene or the process. Let us discuss the concluding transition. This is the word used to start the final paragraph. While many students are taught to use in conclusion, the accuplacer often prefers more sophisticated alternatives like ultimately, given these factors, or overall. Be careful with therefore as a concluding transition. Therefore should only be used if the final paragraph is a direct, logical result of the previous paragraph. If the final paragraph is a broad summary, then ultimately is a better fit. When you are taking the test next Tuesday, use the read aloud test in your head. As you read a passage, listen for the logic gaps. If you find a place where the author moves from a general rule to a specific case without saying, for example, that is a transition error. If you find a conclusion that feels like it's starting a new essay, that is a conclusion error. If you find an introduction that is talking about the history of the universe, when the topic is honeybee flight patterns, that is an introduction error. As you finish this block on your route, think of these elements as the signage on the road. The introduction is the sign that tells you which town you are entering. The transitions are the turn signals and the one-way signs that keep you on the right path. The conclusion is the thank you for visiting sign as you leave. If any of those signs are missing or pointing the wrong way, the driver, the reader, will get lost. To summarize the essential strategies for module ACC WR 2.2. First, categorize every transition into a family, contrast, addition, causation, or illustration. Ensure the signpost matches the logical relationship. Second, the introduction must funnel from targeted context to a specific thesis. Avoid, since the beginning of time, fluff. Third, the thesis statement is the contract and usually lives at the end of the first paragraph. Fourth, use the look-back, look-forward technique for transitions between paragraphs to create a seamless bridge. Fifth, the conclusion must synthesize and circle back to the introduction, providing rhetorical closure. Sixth, never allow new information or new arguments to appear in the conclusion. Seventh, match the intensity of your transition. Use nevertheless for concessions and specifically for high-definition examples. Eighth, use spatial and temporal anchors like simultaneously or adjacent to help the reader visualize processes or settings. Ninth, eliminate abrupt shifts by adding shock absorber transitions between opposing or unrelated ideas. By mastering introductions, conclusions, and transitions, you are showing that you can manage the user experience of a reader. You aren't just dumping information, you are guiding the reader through a complex mental landscape. This level of rhetorical control is what defines a college-level writer and will ensure you achieve a top score on the accuplacer writing section. This concludes our deep dive into module ACC WR 2.2. You are building a complete mental map of the writing process. When you are ready to focus on the precision and sharpness of individual words, our next target is module ACC WR 3.1, precision. Just say the word next when you are ready to move forward.